The note was written in crayon on paper so old, it felt like fabric against my fingertips. 3 words in a child's shaky handwriting. Let me out. Found it on the floor beneath the tiny door, a door I hadn't noticed during the home inspection, hadn't seen in any of the listing photos, hadn't known existed until last night, when I watched it swing open by itself at 2:47 a.m. The door was maybe 10 inches tall, painted the same cream color as the wall hidden behind boxes in the corner of what the realtor had called a charming vintage living room. It had a miniature brass handle and a lock mechanism so intricate it looked Victorian. And according to the home inspector's report, I was now frantically rereading this wall that was supposed to be solid. No crawl space, no access panel, no reason for a door to exist here at all. But the door was real. I could touch it, could feel the scratches beneath it, where something had clawed at the wood from the inside. Could see the way the hinges had worn grooves into the frame from decades, maybe centuries of opening and closing. And I could smell what came from behind it, earth and decay and something else. Something that reminded me of the nursing home where my grandmother died. That specific scent of a body that's alive but shouldn't be. My phone buzzed. Text from my husband Aaron, who was still at his office downtown. How's the unpacking going? Don't wait up, running late. I looked at the note again, at the door, at the boxes I'd moved aside last night, revealing what had been hidden. Then I heard it, a small, wet sound, like a child trying to cry quietly so they won't get caught, coming from behind the door. Welcome back to the channel. Quick question. Have you ever bought something and discovered it came with more than you paid for? Maybe a used car with someone's belongings still in the trunk. Maybe a storage unit with leftover furniture. Maybe a house with a tiny door in the wall that absolutely should not exist. And maybe, just maybe, something has been waiting behind that door for a very long time. Waiting for someone to finally move the boxes. Waiting for someone to hear it crying. Waiting to be let out. Hit that subscribe button. Smash the like. And whatever you do, if you find a hidden door in your new home, one that wasn't on the blueprints, one that wasn't mentioned in the inspection, don't open it. And definitely don't believe any notes you find beneath it. This is the story of Elena Morrison, who bought her dream house in the Catskills in September 2023. This is what she found in the corner of her living room. This is what happened when she tried to help. And this is why the house is back on the market for half what she paid. The house was everything Aaron and I had ever wanted. Built in 1887 on the shore of Lake Wyndham, 40 miles northwest of Kingston, New York, the property was a 3-bedroom Victorian cottage with original hardwood floors, hand-carved cherry wood trim, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over water so clear you could see the stones at the bottom. We'd been looking for 2 years, stuck in a cramped Brooklyn apartment where the ceiling leaked and the neighbors fought, and the rent kept climbing, when Aaron's coworker mentioned her cousin was selling a charming fixer-upper in the Catskills. The listing price seemed too good to be true. $185,000 for 3 bedrooms, 2 acres, lake access, and enough space to actually breathe. In New York real estate terms, it was essentially free. What's wrong with it? I'd asked Aaron when he showed me the listing. Nothing, it's just remote, and it's been on the market for 8 months. People want new construction, not 130-year-old cottages that need work. But I didn't want new construction. I wanted history, character, a place with stories in its walls. We made an offer the same day we toured it. The sellers, an elderly couple who'd inherited it from an aunt and never actually lived there, accepted immediately. Almost desperately, the realtor had said like they were relieved to be rid of it. The inspection came back mostly clean. Some roof repairs needed. Foundation settling normal for a house this old. The basement showed signs of moisture damage, but nothing structural. All the weird quirks you'd expect from Victorian-era construction. The one thing the inspector noted that gave me pause was in his final comments. House has unusual energy flow. Recommend sage cleansing before occupancy. Aaron had laughed at that. Energy flow. What is he, a crystal healer? But the inspector, a 60-something former contractor named Dutch, who'd been in the business for 40 years, had looked at me very seriously and said, "I've inspected a lot of old houses, Mrs. Morrison. This one feels occupied, even though it's empty." I'd dismissed it as small-town superstition. Dutch probably told that to every city couple buying an old country house trying to add local color to the transaction. We closed in early September. Labor Day weekend, we loaded a U-Haul with everything we owned and made the 2-hour drive north into the mountains. The house looked even better than I remembered. The late summer sun turned the lake gold. The trees were just beginning to show hints of autumn color. The porch swing creaked gently in the breeze. Home. Finally, actually, home. Aaron had to go back to the city. Monday morning, he was still working at his firm in Manhattan, doing the commute 3 days a week until he could arrange a full remote schedule. I'd quit my job as a graphic designer specifically to focus on fixing up the house. 6 months, I figured. 6 months to renovate, to settle in, to make this place ours before Aaron transitioned to remote work, and we could really start our new life. That first weekend was perfect. We unpacked boxes, christened every room, drank wine on the porch while watching the sunset over the lake. This was what we'd dreamed about for years. Space, quiet, beauty. The house had personality. The floors creaked in specific spots, a language you learned after walking them a few times. The windows rattled when wind came off the lake. The water pipes sang when you turned on the upstairs shower. Old house sounds, comforting sounds. But there was one sound I couldn't place. Late Sunday night, after Aaron had fallen asleep, I'd gotten up to use the bathroom. Walking back through the living room in the dark, I'd heard something that made me stop. A soft scratching, rhythmic, coming from the far corner where we'd stacked boxes of books we hadn't found shelf space for yet. I'd stood perfectly still, listening. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, 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 like fingernails on wood or small claws. Mouse, I'd muttered, annoyed. Of course there were mice. Old house in the woods. We'd get traps tomorrow. But mice don't scratch in rhythm. Don't pause like they're waiting for a response. I'd grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the corner. The scratching stopped instantly. Just boxes. Just shadows. Just the corner of an old house settling in the dark. But as I'd turned to go back to bed, my flashlight had caught something. A shadow on the wall that didn't match the boxes. Smaller. Rounder. Almost like a child crouched down. I'd blinked and it was gone. Trick of the light, I'd told myself. You're tired. New house, new sounds, new shadows. Your brain is just adjusting. Monday morning. Aaron left for the city at 6 a.m. I'd walked him to the car, coffee in hand, and watched him drive away down the long dirt road that connected our property to the main highway. Then I turned back to look at the house. In the early morning light, it looked different, less welcoming. The windows seemed darker than they should, like they were full of shadow, even with the sun rising. The porch swing was perfectly still, even though there was wind in the trees. And in the living room window, the big one that faced the driveway, I could have sworn I saw something move. A small shape there and gone. "You're being ridiculous," I said aloud. "It's your house. Stop creeping yourself out." But as I walked back inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that I hadn't been alone since we'd moved in, and that whatever shared this house with me had been waiting a very long time for Aaron to leave. I found the door on Monday afternoon while moving boxes. The living room was a disaster. Boxes everywhere, furniture half assembled, packing paper littering the floor like snow. I decided to tackle the corner first, the spot where we'd piled all the deal with later boxes. As I pulled them aside one by one, I saw it. A door. Tiny, maybe 10 inches tall and 8 inches wide. Painted the same cream color as the wall with matching crown molding that made it nearly invisible unless you were looking directly at it. I knelt down, staring. The door had a miniature brass handle, tarnished but intricate, with a keyhole beneath it. The hinges were brass, too delicate and ornate. Victorian craftsmanship. Beautiful work for something so small. But why was it here? And I pulled out my phone and called the inspector. Dutch answered on the third ring. "Dutch, it's Elena Morrison, the Lake Wyndham house. I have a question about the structure." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, There's a door. A small door in the living room wall. About 10 inches tall. It wasn't in your report." Silence on the other end. "Dutch, what wall?" "The east wall, the one that backs onto the original kitchen addition." "Mrs. Morrison, I inspected that wall. There's no door." "I'm looking at it right now." More silence, and then, "Can you send me a picture?" I took several photos and texted them over. Waited while he looked. "Jesus," he muttered. "That wasn't there during inspection. I would have noted it. Are you sure you didn't move something that was covering it?" "Just boxes." "And you're certain it's a door, not just decorative molding?" I reached out and grasped the tiny brass handle. It turned easily, clicking in its mechanism. I pulled. The door didn't budge. "It's locked," I told Dutch. "From the inside, I think. There's a keyhole, but no key." "Don't open it." The certainty in his voice made my skin crawl. Why? Old houses like that. Sometimes they have crawl spaces, access points, places sealed off for a reason. Could be structural damage, could be mold, could be... He trailed off. Could be what? Could be nothing. But in 40 years, I've learned to trust my gut about old houses. And my gut says, leave that door alone. That's not very scientific. Neither is energy flow, but I noted it in my report, didn't I? His voice was sharp. "I don't know what that door leads to, Mrs. Morrison, but I know it wasn't there 2 weeks ago, and I know a house has a feeling about it. So unless you want to find out what's behind a door that shouldn't exist, I'd suggest you leave it locked." He hung up. I sat on the floor staring at the tiny door. Logic said Dutch was wrong. The door had obviously been there for decades. Look at the tarnish on the brass, the wear on the wood. He'd simply missed it during inspection. Easy to do with all the boxes. But another part of me, the part that had heard scratching last night, that had seen shadow children in the corners, wondered if maybe Dutch was right. Maybe some doors should stay locked. I took more photos, measuring the door with a tape measure. 10 inches tall, 8 inches wide, set about 3 inches above the baseboard. The wall behind it should be solid according to the blueprints I'd reviewed during closing. This was an exterior wall. Nothing behind it but insulation and siding and the outdoors. Unless the blueprints were wrong. Or unless something had been built into the walls that wasn't on the official plans. Victorian houses were full of secrets. Hidden staircases, servant passages, storage nooks. Maybe this was just a coal chute or a dumbwaiter shaft, now sealed off and forgotten. I tried the handle again, pulled harder. The door didn't move. Then I noticed the scratches. Beneath the door, worn into the hardwood floor, were dozens of thin parallel lines, like something had been scratching to get out, or maybe to get in. And there, caught between the door and the floor, was a scrap of paper. I pulled it free carefully. It was old, really old, the kind of paper that feels like cloth, yellowed and brittle at the edges. And written on it in faded crayon was a child's drawing, a stick figure behind bars or maybe behind a door. Big round eyes, a frown. I turned it over. 3 words on the back, written in the same childish hand. "Let me out," my phone buzzed. "Aaron, how's it going?" "Making progress." I stared at the note, at the door, at the scratches on the floor. "Fine," I typed back. "Just found something weird. Call you later." I stood up, folding the note carefully and putting it in my pocket. This was nothing. A child's old drawing lost behind boxes decades ago. Previous owners must have had kids. Kids who played around that door, who scratched at the floor, who left notes behind. Nothing sinister, just history. But as I walked away to grab more boxes, I heard it again. Scratch, scratch, pause, coming from behind the tiny door. I spun around. The door was closed. The corner was empty, but I'd heard it. Clear as day. Something scratching from the other side. I grabbed my car keys and left. Spent the rest of the day in town browsing the antique shops, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Bought sage at the local co-op because why not? Maybe Dutch had a point. When I came back at sunset, the house looked normal again. Welcoming. Home. I made dinner, unpacked more boxes, worked until midnight, then fell into bed exhausted. And at 2:47 a.m., I woke to the sound of the tiny door opening. The sound was unmistakable. A soft click as the lock disengaged, then the faint creak of hinges that hadn't been oiled in 100 years. I lay in bed perfectly still, listening. Footsteps. Small. Padding across the hardwood floor of the living room. My rational brain screamed, mouse, raccoon, something natural. But mice don't have footsteps that sound like bare feet on wood. Don't move with the deliberate rhythm of something walking upright. The footsteps stopped. I waited, my heart slamming against my ribs. Then I heard it, a child's voice, soft and echoey, like it was coming from very far away, even though it was just in the next room. "Why won't you let me out?" I shot upright in bed, fumbling for my phone. The footsteps resumed faster now. Running, coming toward the bedroom. I turned on my phone's flashlight and pointed it at the bedroom door. Nothing. The footsteps stopped just outside. I could hear breathing. Shallow, rapid. The breathing of a frightened child. "Hello." My voice came out thin and strangled. The breathing stopped. Silence. I sat in bed for 20 minutes, flashlight pointed at the door, before I worked up the courage to check the living room. The tiny door was closed, locked, exactly as I'd left it. But there were muddy footprints on the floor, small, child-sized, leading from the door across the living room, down the hall, stopping right outside my bedroom. I took pictures with shaking hands. Then I cleaned them up, scrubbing until the floor was spotless, trying to convince myself I'd tracked in dirt earlier and forgotten. But I hadn't. The footprints were too small, too perfect. The feet of a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When Aaron called the next morning, I almost told him everything. But what would I say? Our house is haunted by a child who lives behind a tiny door. He'd think I was cracking under the isolation. Would insist I come back to the city with him. And part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave and never come back. But a bigger part, the part that had fallen in love with this house, that had dreamed of this life, refused to be scared away by shadows and sounds and footprints that probably had a rational explanation. I spent Tuesday researching the house's history. The property records showed continuous ownership since 1887, when it was built by a doctor named Edward Thorne. He'd lived there with his wife, Catherine, and their daughter, Alice, until 1894, when Catherine died of tuberculosis. Edward sold the house the same year and moved to Albany. It changed hands several times over the next decades. The longest owner was a family named Whitmore, who lived there from 1923 to 1957. They had 4 children. One, a daughter named Grace, died in the house at age 7. Accidental drowning in the lake, according to the death certificate I found in the county records. After the Whitmores, the house went through a series of short-term owners. No one stayed more than a few years, and in 2003, it was inherited by the elderly couple we'd bought it from, who'd kept it as a rental property, but never lived there themselves. I called the County Historical Society and spoke to a woman named Margaret, who'd lived in the area her whole life. "Oh, the Thorne house," she said when I gave her the address. Beautiful place. Sad history, though. Sad how, well, the daughter, Alice Thorne, she disappeared. The records say her mother died of tuberculosis. Catherine did, yes, but Alice vanished about 2 months before that. Never found. Edward Thorne claimed she ran away, but Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. Town gossip said he put her somewhere. That she was sick, mentally sick, and he couldn't cure her, so he hid her away. Where would he hide her? No one knew. Some said an asylum. Others said, she paused. Well, Edward was a doctor. He did his own autopsies, his own experiments, had a surgical theater in the house, and some folks claimed they'd hear her crying at night even after Edward said she'd run away. Like she was still there, but no one could find her. My blood went cold. Where was the surgical theater? Basement, I believe, though I've never been inside. After I hung up, I stood at the top of the basement stairs for a long time. I hadn't been down there yet. The basement wasn't finished, just a dirt floor stone foundation, the kind of space you used for storage and forgot about. During the inspection, Dutch had noted the moisture damage and recommended a dehumidifier, but otherwise said it was structurally sound. But he hadn't mentioned a surgical theater. Hadn't mentioned anything that would explain a tiny door in the upstairs wall. I descended the stairs slowly. The basement was dark, damp, smelling of earth and mold. My phone flashlight barely cut the shadows. The space was smaller than I'd expected, maybe a quarter of the house's footprint. Most of it was open, but there was a closed door on the far wall. A normal-sized door this time, with a padlock on it that looked new. I tried the lock. It held firm. Through the gap under the door, I could see light. Not from my flashlight. Different light. Flickering like a candle. And I could hear something. Faint but distinct. A child humming. The same tune over and over. A lullaby I almost recognized. "Alice," I whispered. The humming stopped. Then from behind the locked door, a small voice. "You're not my father." I ran. Back upstairs, out the front door, into my car. I drove to town and got a hotel room and didn't go back until Aaron came Thursday night. I told him everything. The door, the note, the footprints, the basement. He listened patiently, then hugged me. "You've been alone too much," he said gently. "Old houses make weird sounds, and your mind fills in the blanks. It's not ghosts, Elle. It's isolation and stress." I heard her Aaron, a child's voice. Probably kids from one of the neighboring properties. Sound carries weird near water. He was so rational, so certain. Part of me wanted to believe him. We went back to the house together. Aaron checked the basement door, still locked. Checked the tiny door in the living room, still sealed. "See, nothing's wrong. We probably just need to call a contractor about that little door. Get it opened properly, see what's behind it. I bet it's just a sealed-off vent or something." That night with Aaron there, the house felt normal again. We made dinner, watched a movie, went to bed like any normal couple in their new home. But at 2:47 a.m., I woke up to find Aaron wasn't in bed. I found him in the living room, standing in front of the tiny door, his hand on the brass handle. "Aaron." He didn't respond, didn't turn around, just kept turning the handle over and over like he was trying to unlock it. "Aaron, what are you doing?" He finally looked at me and his eyes were wrong, unfocused, glassy. "She wants out," he said in a voice that wasn't quite his. "She's been waiting so long. We should let her out." "Aaron, you're sleepwalking. Come back to bed." She showed me, behind the door. She's been in there since 1894, since her father put her there, since he locked her in and left her to... I grabbed his arm and pulled. He came away from the door, easily blinking, like he was waking up. "What, Elle? What am I doing out here? You were sleepwalking. You've never sleepwalked before." "I was dreaming. There was a girl. She was trapped and she was crying and she said, he frowned. She said you had the key. I don't have a key. She said you did, that all you had to do was use it. We went back to bed. Aaron fell asleep immediately. I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what Margaret had said. Edward was a doctor. He did his own experiments, and I thought about Alice Thorne, 7 years old. Disappeared in 1894, supposedly run away. But what if she hadn't run away? What if her father, a doctor who did autopsies, who had a surgical theater in his basement, had decided his sick daughter needed treatment? What if he'd put her somewhere small and dark and locked? What if she'd been in there when the house was sold, when the walls were painted over, when the door was hidden behind furniture and boxes and years of forgetting? What if she was still there? Friday morning, Aaron went back to the city. I waited until his car was out of sight. Then I went to the hardware store and bought a crowbar. I was going to open that door, not because I believed there was a ghost, but because I needed to prove there wasn't. Needed to see that behind the door was just empty space or old insulation or maybe a dead mouse. I needed to prove this was all in my head. Back at the house, I positioned the crowbar under the tiny door's edge and pushed. The wood cracked. The door held. I repositioned and tried again. The frame splintered. One more push, and the door burst inward with a sound like breaking bones. Behind it, darkness. A space that shouldn't exist. A cavity in the wall about 2 feet deep, 3 feet tall, 4 feet wide. Just big enough for a child. I shined my phone light inside and my stomach dropped. The space was a room, a tiny room. The walls were covered in drawings, hundreds of them drawn in what looked like charcoal, or maybe dried blood. Stick figures, houses, lakes. A man with a doctor's bag, a girl behind bars, and in the corner curled into a ball was a skeleton. Small, child-sized, still wearing the remains of a dress. Around the skeleton's ankle was a shackle, a chain leading from the shackle to a bolt in the wall. My phone slipped from my hand. Edward Thorne hadn't sent Alice away, hadn't committed her to an asylum. He'd put her in the walls, had locked his sick daughter in a space too small to stand, had chained her so she couldn't reach the door, had sealed her in and painted over the entrance and left her to die in the dark. And she'd been here ever since, in the walls, scratching, crying, leaving notes that fell through cracks in the floorboards, waiting for someone to let her out. I heard movement behind me, turned. The girl from my dreams stood in the living room, 7 years old, dark hair, wearing a stained white dress. Her skin was gray. Her eyes were black pits. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for letting me out." She smiled. Her teeth were brown and broken. "Now we can play." I ran for the front door. It wouldn't open. The handle turned, but the door wouldn't budge, like something was holding it from the outside. I ran to the back door. Same thing. The windows wouldn't break. I hit them with chairs with my crowbar, but they wouldn't even crack. Alice stood in the middle of the living room, tilting her head like a curious bird. "Don't you want to play? I've been alone for so long in the dark. But now you've let me out. Now I can have a friend." "I'll call the police," I said, fumbling for my phone. "I'll call someone. They'll give you a proper burial. I don't want a burial." Her voice turned sharp. "I want to play." She moved then faster than possible. One moment she was across the room, the next, she was inches from my face. Up close, I could see that she wasn't fully there. Parts of her flickered, going transparent. I could see the wall through her chest. "You're like him," she hissed. "You're like my father. You want to lock me up again, put me back in the dark." "No, liar!" She shoved me. I flew backward, hitting the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. "He said he was helping me. Said the dark would make me better. Said if I was quiet and good, he'd let me out. But he never did. He left me there. Left me to starve. Left me to die." She was crying now, black tears running down her gray face. I scratched until my fingers bled. I screamed until my voice was gone. I waited for someone to find me, but no one came. No one heard. And I stayed in the dark for 129 years. She looked at me with those hollow eyes. "Now it's your turn." The walls began to move. The house groaned, and I realized what was happening. The entire house had been Alice's prison. Every wall, every floor, every ceiling. Edward Thorne hadn't just locked her in a cavity, he'd built the house around her suffering, had sealed her pain into the structure itself. And now that she was out, the house remembered. Doors appeared in the walls, tiny doors, dozens of them, opening one by one. Behind each door, darkness. The same darkness Alice had lived in for over a century. "You can keep me company," Alice said softly. "You can stay in the dark with me. Forever." The nearest door yawned open wider, impossibly wide, becoming a mouth that wanted to swallow me. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the crowbar and ran to the basement. The locked door, the surgical theater, whatever Edward Thorne had left down there, whatever he'd been doing to Alice before he put her in the walls, the answer was behind that door. I swung the crowbar at the padlock. It broke on the third hit. I threw open the door. The room beyond was exactly what Margaret had described. A surgical theater. Victorian medical equipment covered in dust. An operating table with restraints. Jars of preserved organs. And on the walls, Edward Thorne's notes. Page after page detailing his attempts to cure his daughter's illness. The experimental treatments, the surgeries, the procedures that went wrong. Subject shows no improvement. Increased the dosage. She screams too much. Must sedate. Removed portion of frontal lobe today. She is quieter now, but still exhibits symptoms. Catherine grows suspicious. Must move to more permanent solution. Alice stood in the doorway behind me, but she wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at her father's notes, at the operating table, at the truth of what he'd done. "He said he loved me," she whispered. "Said he was making me better." "He was sick," I said. "What he did to you was wrong, but taking me won't change that, won't make it better. Nothing can make it better. I'm dead. I died alone in the dark, and that can't be undone." "No, but you don't have to saw in the dark anymore. You're out now. You're free." She looked at me with those hollow eyes. free. I've been dead for over 100 years. I'm not free. I'm trapped in what I was, in what he made me. And then I understood. Alice wasn't trapped in the walls. The walls were trapped in Alice. Her suffering had soaked into the house, had turned it into an echo of her prison. As long as her remains were in the walls, as long as her pain was sealed in the structure, she could never leave. "We need to bury you," I said quietly. "Properly. In the ground, not in the walls." Alice tilted her head, considering. "And if I let you, then you can rest. Finally rest. And if I don't, then you stay here. Forever. Trapped in this house like you were trapped in the walls." She stared at me for a long time. Then she nodded. I called Aaron. Told him to come home. Told him to bring a priest and the police and anyone who would listen. When they arrived, I showed them the tiny door, the cavity in the wall, the skeleton still chained in the corner. The police brought in forensics. The remains were confirmed to be a child approximately 7 years old, died sometime in the 1890s. Dental records eventually matched them to Alice Thorne, missing since 1894. The house became a crime scene. We weren't allowed back for 2 weeks while they investigated, documented, processed the evidence. When we finally returned, Alice's remains were gone. She'd been given a proper burial at the county cemetery, her grave marked with a headstone that read, Alice Thorne, 1887, 1894. Finally home. The house felt different now, lighter. The walls didn't press in anymore. The shadows were just shadows. But on quiet nights, I still hear it sometimes. Not scratching, not crying, humming, that same lullaby, but peaceful now, content. Alice isn't trapped anymore. She's not reaching out from the walls, not leaving notes beneath doors. She's just there. A presence, a memory. A girl who finally got to leave the dark. We stayed in the house, fixed it up, made it beautiful, and we sealed that tiny door permanently, filled the cavity with concrete, plastered over it, painted it. Because some doors once opened should never be used again. That was 6 months ago. We're happy here now. Aaron works remotely full-time. I've started a design business. We've made friends in town. The house is ours, really ours. But last week I was in the basement doing laundry when I noticed something. Another door. Tiny. Hidden behind the water heater in the corner. This one was different. Newer. The wood wasn't old Victorian craftsmanship. It looked recent, maybe 20 years old, with fresh paint and a lock that hadn't tarnished yet. I pulled out my phone and called Margaret at the Historical Society. The house was a rental property from 2003 to when we bought it, right? That's correct. Were there ever any incidents, missing persons, anything strange? A long pause. There was one thing. In 2012, a couple with a young son. The boy disappeared. They claimed he ran away, but he was only 5 years old. The parents moved out immediately after. The police searched the property, but never found anything. Do you remember the boy's name? Michael Reeves. I hung up and looked at the door. From behind it, I heard humming. A child's voice. But not Alice's lullaby. A different song. a nursery rhyme. And beneath the door, a piece of paper was sliding through. Fresh, new, written in crayon. I picked it up with shaking hands. "Let me out."